During the Cold War, both the Soviets and NATO had large stockpiles of tactical nuclear weapons, smaller munitions designed to be used on the battlefield to destroy headquarters or formations of armour. When it ended, Western doctrine adjusted. They became very much a weapon of last resort. A new study says the Russian view is very different. Moscow has developed a whole suite of tactical nuclear weapons, and NATO needs to take the threat of them far more seriously.
Russian reliance on non-strategic nuclear weapons in the current era is no longer really about the tiny battlefield. Now it's more about the theater. Now it's more about striking NATO targets in depth. It's about hitting command headquarters. It's about reaching far and deep into the NATO lines to destroy NATO capabilities, and also to prevent the United States from being able to reinforce. Because, you know, right now, if there were a war in Europe, the United States would have to move a huge number of troops from the continental United States to Europe. So part of the Russian strategy would be to prevent those troops from landing by destroying the airports and seaports that they would need to enter. And for that, you would really need a relatively small nuclear weapon, probably the size of the Hiroshima or Nagasaki bomb, on the tip of a ballistic or cruise missile with incredible accuracy.
In his report, Mr. Alberque says Russia believes it can always out-threaten NATO, partly because it's willing to absorb losses of men and equipment to an extent unimaginable to the West.
If Russia believes that they have escalation dominance, in other words, in a conflict, they're always willing to go slightly further than the United States and the NATO allies are willing to go, then Putin might get it in his head that he should launch a surprise attack. Now, I think the war in Ukraine has severely degraded Putin's confidence in his conventional capabilities, but paradoxically, that means he's going to rely more on nuclear weapons to do the jobs that previously he might have relied on conventional weapons to do, which might actually raise the risk of Russia believing it needs to use nuclear weapons, whereas maybe 10 years ago, they thought they could take the Baltics without resorting to nuclear weapons. Now they might resort to nuclear weapons earlier in a conflict to try to prevent the US from intervening or to keep the level of conflict at a level where Russia is in control.
So why hasn't Russia used tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine? Part of it is political. Both India and China have warned the Kremlin not to. But Mr. Alberque says there's also military reasons.
The military reason why they're not using nuclear weapons is there's just not really a battlefield target. Even though they are bogged down in Bakhmut, it's not like there's a huge concentration of Ukrainian forces that a 20 or 30 kiloton nuclear weapon would be the right thing to do. The Ukrainian forces are relatively dispersed, and they concentrate and they move and they maneuver. It's really hard to just fix them on the battlefield and hit them with a nuclear blast that would make any sense. Ironically, I think much earlier in the conflict, at the Azovstal steel plant, that would actually be a scenario where, I hate to say it, a small nuclear weapon or chemical weapons would have made more sense to get out entrenched defenders in a very, very fixed position.
Mr. Alberque believes the Russians have between 2,000 and 3,500 non-strategic nuclear weapons, compared to NATO's 200. So what would happen if they did use them?
I honestly think last year we heard, and this is not verified, but we heard that Tony Blinken told his equivalent in Russia, Patrushev, that if Russia were to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, that the United States would destroy Russian forces in Ukraine, including in Crimea, through conventional means, that we wouldn't escalate to the nuclear level, but we would deal a catastrophic blow to Russia's war effort. I think that's probably true. That makes sense to me, because if Russia crosses that threshold, I mean, okay, they'll lose the support of India and Pakistan, and they may lose a lot of traction in the international sphere. But if they use nuclear weapons and they are seen to not be punished, then I think that would be the firing gun for many countries around the world to acquire nuclear weapons.
The report concludes that the US and its allies need to step up their monitoring of Russia's nuclear activities, pay more attention to discussions inside Russia on nuclear doctrine, and watch Moscow's nuclear sites and military exercises more closely. For the West, says Mr. Alberque, it's a matter of survival. Simon Newton, Forces News. Thanks for watching. For more from Forces News, like and subscribe to our channel.